Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I'm Chris here, as always, with Brendan. How are we doing?
Good. Yeah, it's playoff time already. It feels like it was kind of inevitable for like several months, but it just wasn't quite there. It's like, how many games we got? We still got 10 games left. What's going on? Just get it over and done with. Because it felt like we knew the teams for a while, but finally it is here. We are in the playoffs, and it is episode 219.
Can I just say the playoffs snuck up so fast that it was like, oh, the playoffs are about to happen. And then after when the playoffs are about to happen, they just started.
Yeah.
You know how normally there's a bit of a lull and you get like a couple of days and then you get playoffs?
It was a short break. I think
sometimes
we get like almost a week. I think it just depends on like the bookings and stuff like that they can get. But especially with it starting on like Easter weekend, everyone was kind of busy with stuff, and all of a sudden, like I forgot. I thought it was starting like yesterday rather than the day before. And I checked my phone. I was like seeing notifications about goals being scored. I'm like, what is going on? Hockey's being played.
Yeah, same thing. I was like, we have to get our bracket challenge done. And we suddenly had this moment for to peek behind the curtain a little bit. We suddenly had a moment in the admin chat on the Australian Facebook, NHL Facebook fans page of, have we got a bracket challenge up? And everyone went, oh crap.
Yeah, I kind of did. I did my bracket earlier, like towards like when it kind of started, and then I thought like, I'll wait until like all the playoff teams are finalized to make the league. Usually, I post like the league thing up, and then it kind of happened, and I was out at the time, and I kind of forgot about it. All of a sudden, it was just like, oh shit, playoffs are like a couple of days away. We got to get this up and going. But it's up. Hopefully, people got their brackets in.
I think from what I looked, yeah, you can still get your brackets in. Look, it's a good start. Like there's I don't think we've had too many. We'll get into it later, obviously. I don't think there's many what I'd call surprise outcomes, but we will talk about that in a minute. As you pointed out, though, it is episode 219, and what that means is trivia. Now, I don't tell Brendan this. I never tell Brendan what it's going to be, because it's really hard to come up with. But I found one today that absolutely ties in to one of our key themes. So, Alexander Ovechkin obviously now has, and we're going to talk about it, spoiler alert for anyone who doesn't know, now has the NHL goal scoring record on his own. Now, he finished, like we're incrementally going up through his tallies. He finished one season on 219 goals. What season was it that he reached 219?
Oh, okay. That the total was 219.
So by the end of this season, he hit 219.
Okay. All right. Let's try and do some. So I think Ovi came into the league in 2008. I want to say, is that right? 2008, 2009.
No, earlier than that.
Early. It was the year before, because it was the year before.
Earlier than that.
No. Oh, hang on. What am I? Oh, sorry. Hang on. No, I've gone to 205 or whatever.
2005.
2005. Yeah, sorry, I got my years mixed up for a sec. 2005. So I'm pretty sure the first couple of seasons he was scoring like 40 to 50 goals at least. So it should be, my guess, like about 4 seasons in. So is it like 2009 that he?
It is the 2008-2009 season. He finishes at 219. To give you everyone else an idea, he scores 52, 46, 65, 56.
Yeah.
Like, if we want to talk goal scoring and why Ovi has this record, 52, 46, 65, 56.
There's probably more years over 50 than under, I would imagine.
Yep, let's just have a look. So he goes 52, then 46 is down, then 65, 56, 50, 32 and 38 were low ones, and then another 32, low one, and then 51.
There's a few like shortened seasons and stuff too.
Yep. Then 51, 53, 50. Yes, a 33 is a 49, then a 51, 48, 24, obviously, 50, 42, 31, and 42 this year.
Yeah.
So, but those first, like 3 of those first 4 seasons and 4 of those first 5, he clears 50. And like that's absolute insanity. So if anyone's wondering how the hell Ovechkin gets this record, that's how Ovechkin gets this record. His scoring early on was insane. And he's always just maintained this standard. So let's talk about it. So he now holds the record 897 for the end of season, obviously. He passed.
I actually like the last game was against the Penguins, and he scored in that game. He'd already had the record at that point because he's now like the record was like 895.
Yeah.
So he'd scored previously and then he scored another one, but it was kind of nice to have basically more or less their biggest rivals for like his career, in that house.
He talked about that too.
Standing ovation from Penguins fans. Like there's not a lot of people that will get that from essentially a storied rival.
Yeah, he talked about that as well before the game. The fact that him and Sid, again, especially, he talked about that, about having them just go through their careers together. And also when they asked about, well, you've got the record now, and he went, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So he will be back.
Well, he's got another year on a contract at least. Beyond that, he'll be 40, and we'll see. But
I think after next season, probably it. But
I reckon probably next season is the wrap up. But look, honestly, the pace that he's on, like I don't know whether or not he's going to be able to keep it up. But realistically, like we thought that he was declining, in the last couple of years. Before that, he was looking at being like, oh well, he's more of a 30 goal scorer now rather than a 40 or 50. The pace that he put up during this season, obviously he had something to shoot for. Realistically, they were doing everything they could to put him in a position to succeed. But this was one of the best, if not, I think the best goal scoring pace of his career this year.
And just not to put too fine a point on it, but another big spoiler for our end of season episode, when we look back at our predictions, I did predict that Ovi would get the record this year.
Yeah,
I thought he would get there, and I thought he would do it quite easily. So
the fact that he did it, the fact that he did it with he broke his leg this year, and then and that wasn't enough to stop him from getting it.
He passed Gretzky obviously by one goal with the same amount of games, like tied him with one less. Gretzky obviously followed him around because he talked about the fact that Gordie Howe was with him. And they did tell the story a couple of times, which I always love, which is that Gordie went up to him because it took him a week. And Gordie went up to Gretzky and basically said to him, "Oi, can we get this done, please? I'm following you around until you get this. But I'm going to go home. I got stuff. Can you just get on? And I think he did it. Ovi nearly did it with a hat trick, which would have been amazing. He passed up the empty netter.
Yeah. He did say apparently he just didn't want to do it that way. Which is fair. At that point in time, he had 4 or 5 games left in the season. And
Spencer Carberry said they had that chat, and he went over straight to Spencer Carberry and went, "Nah, I'm not on the. I don't want to be on the ice for that one there." Instead, their rookie got his first goal with the empty netter instead in that game, and everyone went, "Oh, we've got to watch another one." One of the things I think that people have sort of learned though about watching the Capitals is while their offense has been absolutely amazing, their defense sucks. But I think that's something that people have maybe got a bit more of an idea about.
At times, I think they've been okay this season. I don't like. I think there's been some.
They're prone to collapse.
Yeah.
They're prone to collapse. I'm not going to say they're terrible as a defense. I'll say they're prone to a moment of just, that's it, we're done.
Yeah, I'm curious how they will hold up against some other teams
scoring bunch.
Occasionally, they just don't have it some nights, and they get blown up.
I think the thing with the Caps, I think, is that teams will score in bunches. So they'll either be really good defensively, or teams will get 3 or 4. And they're weirdly soft goals too. A lot of the time they concede. It's very bizarre. So obviously that means that Wayne Gretzky gets to go home, which means we get to stop seeing Wayne sitting in boxes, which is great. We're all fans of the less Gretzky we get, the better. Just saying that's a personal statement, everybody. If you don't like it, don't care. Speaking of people that quite often people don't like, the Philadelphia Flyers have relieved head coach John Tortorella of his duties. This was weird. This felt like it was weird. Okay, let me clarify. This was weird for anybody not called John Tortorella.
Yeah.
But if your name is John Tortorella, this was a Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously it feels like every time we get a hiring of John Tortorella, there's this timer that's set. It's either 2 seasons or 3 seasons where it's like, all right, well, at some point in time, it's going to wear off. They're going to get tired of him, and he's gone. I
feel like it's the Simpsons episode where Homer's, they name the character, the character in the TV show after Homer, obviously, and they do that whole thing, and then he does something stupid, and they all stand around him at work and going, "Now, quiet, everybody. We're about to do something really stupid," and they're all watching. I feel like that with Tortorella. It's like he's about to do something that's going to get him fired. And it just came like we've had all of these little arguments with people like, well, that's the one. He's lost the locker room. And they went, no, we're keeping him. That's the one. And then out of nowhere, there was this last big, he's lost the locker room. Except this time, he'd absolutely lost the locker room. And you get the feeling that basically everybody in Philadelphia went to management and went, now, well, we're not doing this anymore.
I think too that there was kind of a time in Philadelphia's kind of, I don't want to necessarily say rebuild, but like at least in terms of their cycle where it no longer kind of made sense for him to be in that role. Like Tortorella is a good kind of role filler for teams that don't have a lot of like high-end skill, that don't have a lot of like, you know, headline kind of star players or anything, and they just want to kind of play this like, you know, gritty lunch pail style for a couple of years, you know, have him take all of the media focus so that they don't necessarily have to like, you know, focus too much on the team as it's kind of, you know, out of the playoff picture, just trying to get high picks kind of thing. And Philadelphia now with, you know, kind of some of their players coming in and, you know, kind of stepping into leadership roles and being in the spotlight, like, you know, like Mitchkov and all that kind of stuff. Like they were starting to get to that point where it was just less and less of the team that needs Tortorella.
Well, you know, my view on Tortorella, I've often said that John Tortorella is the modern day Mike Keenan, that teams would frequently decide their teams were ill-disciplined and they struggled and they needed someone to crack down. And so you'd hire Mike Keenan, but you'd only ever hire Mike Keenan for 1, maybe 2 years, because that doesn't work any longer than 2 years, because Mike Keenan alienates everyone. Again, the most infamous statements on Mike Keenan is that 1994 Rangers documentary. I brought it up before, where one of the fans says that team deserved Mike Keenan. After the way they just collapsed the season before, that team earned Mike Keenan. And you know that Keenan was that sort of coach when the story goes that Messier and him sat in a locker room halfway through the season and Messier was in tears saying to him, back off. Like, you need to back off these players. You are breaking this team. Right? They need toughness, but Mike, you've got to back it down. Right? That's the sort of coach Keenan was. Torts feels like the sort of guy you bring in when you're the Flyers and you're absolutely terrible and there's no expectation. And you use him to kick people around and go play old hockey, and it's going to be tough and it's going to be hard and it's going to be physical. And
it's funny because he's already been fired from the Columbus Blue Jackets, but he is the quintessential Columbus Blue Jackets coach.
He is. And we're going to talk in a minute about where he might end up again, because all of this is going to come full circle. But it's really interesting that the Philadelphia Flyers went, nah, I think they're good. I think we've done it. We've done that experiment now. We're through the Tortorella phase. Maybe we can find somebody that's a real coach now, someone who's seen hockey that's happened in the last 5 years. Right? Remember all the early quotes with Tortorella when they went on that weird bubble tear and were like somewhat good compared to what everyone thought they would be. And when they talked to Tortorella, he'd just go, yeah, I don't believe in modern hockey. It's just toughness, and we're just going to play tough, and I don't need all that fancy stuff. I can make Mitchkov brilliant because I'm tough, and he'll learn toughness. And eventually,
I think someone had a chat with him, because like early on in the season, he was talking about how, like, you know, they were going to give him, you know, a little bit of rope. They weren't going to bench him, you know, immediately as soon as he made mistakes and stuff. They were, you know, they understood that, you know, he was going to, you know, have some teething issues and so forth. And then by the end of the season, towards the middle to the end of the season, he was just getting benched anyway. So it was like clearly, you know, that wore off, and Torch decided he wasn't going to play that game anymore.
Yeah, and again, so let's talk now. With the Flyers, obviously got an interesting coaching situation. However, one of the reasons I like the fact we brought Torts up is because the New York Rangers relieved head coach Peter Laviolette and Phil Housley, the associate, of their duties as well. So the Rangers don't make the playoffs, fire Laviolette, which was always coming. Phil Housley's an interesting firing as well. I think a lot of people were a bit surprised that he went as well. Everyone else on that coaching staff has been told they will have the right to apply for a position under the new head coaching staff. It is okay, however, for the Rangers, because Chris Drury gave an interview to The Athletic talking about the new coach search. And it's okay. He's been talking to Mr. D, and Mr. D has been made aware of what's going on, and Mr. D knows what comes next. And, if ever Chris Drury wanted to beat the accusations that he's a puppet for James Dolan, he's not doing the best job in the world. Because calling Dolan Mr. D, remember, this is a squad that 3 seasons ago had been built, 3-4 seasons ago, had been really well built, as this is a future squad that's got a lot of good talent. It just needs that last kick over the line. You bring a good coach in. And Dolan lost his ever-loving mind and decided that he didn't want any of that anymore. He wanted to trade everybody for veterans. He wanted to bring in a hard nose. He wanted to bring in his guy in Drury as the general manager. Fired the general manager, who then went off to the Montreal Canadiens and started to build the Canadiens in the model of what the Rangers were doing, and the Habs made the playoffs this year.
Can I just say the Mr. D thing is so funny to me, especially too, because where I grew up, Mr. D is like a brand of drink. You can still buy it in Woolworths and stuff like that. There's like the Ducats Mr. D, and he's just this like mobster. I'm going to send you a picture of what Mr.
It feels accurate.
Yeah, he's got the hat on and the glasses and the suit and the big kind of Italian American kind.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
he looks like you know what he looks like. He looks like he coaches the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah,
That's our friend who used to coach the Sabres. That's incredible. Hang on, I will put it up for people.
Yeah, see if you can put it on the.
People who are watching, I will put it up. Hang on a minute. Give me a second. I will
I can't. Every time you say Mr. D, I can't help but imagine this like cartoon mobster that's on the front of these cola drinks. That
we have to. Hang on a minute. This is.
When I was a kid.
This is Mr. D. That is Mr. D. Yeah, that's a mobster.
Yeah.
Again, yeah. He is indeed coaching the Buffalo Sabres as we speak. But yeah, I think it's really interesting in terms of the Rangers, because we've got a few things going on with the Rangers. First of all, there's this question mark over who do you get. First of all, is it Laviolette's fault? I think they played really crappy hockey. Everyone kind of knew that Laviolette was not set up to coach this team. I would question who is set up to coach this team, because I would question what this team is, apart from a really good goalie and a great defenseman and
that didn't necessarily work out for them this year.
Yeah, and I think that what was really interesting, if you go through the Athletic articles on this, there's some very interesting articles on the Athletic about what's going on at the Rangers. And the first thing they point out is that the Rangers had a really good start, and Chris Drury couldn't keep his hands off the team and started ringing other teams and telling them that Chris Kreider was available and that Mika Zibanejad was available. And the second that got out there, alongside what happened with the Trouba trade, the team tanked. It's almost like him going out there and saying that, and that information getting out into public sphere meant that the players just stopped playing for him.
Yeah, I don't know whether it just ruined morale or what.
I don't know. I mean, I understood the you need to move Trouba on thing. As Jacob Trouba did say, it is a rite of passage to get traded and fired from the New York Rangers, and it kind of is. But I find it really interesting as an organization that you make that move, and then rather than go, okay, we've done what we needed to do there, let's back it down now and just settle for a bit. You then try to move Zibanejad. You then try to move Kreider, and Kreider in particular, or both those players, have been a core part of what's going on in that hockey club. Chris Kreider for the last few seasons has been the scorer, has literally been scoring everything for them, above what he should be. So the fact that you would look to move those two on in particular, especially when, like, for example, they don't really have centers. We've talked about this with the Rangers. One of my things with the Rangers in the preseason was they don't own a center, really. Like, Mika Zibanejad I love, but not as a first-line center.
Yeah, I mean, there was a period of time, I think, where he was kind of working out in that role, and it kind of seems like I don't know what step he's lost or anything like that, but that situation's only gotten worse since.
The bigger problem is that Zibanejad has a no move, so you'd have to get him to waive. Now, Kreider has a modified no trade, so you can probably move Kreider. Zibanejad has a no move. The other elephant in the room that we will mention now, because I think it does come into play, is obviously there was the report just before the last game of the season about Artemi Panarin, which suggested that the New York Rangers and Artemi Panarin had made a settlement with a woman that was a staffer on the New York Rangers for sexual harassment. As people pointed out, there was that story mid-year that broke that the New York Rangers had stopped female members of staff traveling with the social media team. Everyone was like, "Oh, what? They're keeping the women off the road. Why are they doing that? That feels so." This is why it now seems.
It sounds like an incident happened that we will no longer get any details about because of a settlement and contract that was signed.
But basically, that came out. They refused point blank to make any statement on it. It came out 2 days after Panarin not only was named the Rangers MVP, but also was named the good guy for the media awards. What worried me a bit was the New York media doubled down on that one, and all the press were like, good guy, and they spent, and all they would say they'd ignore it and just sort of go, he's playing despite the allegations in the Athletic. No further digging on this, and how the beat writers in New York didn't get this before the Athletic got this. Feels to me like, and again, I don't want to get conspiracy theory on this, but it does feel very much like James Dolan has the ability to sort of lean and go, "Would you like access? Do you want access? Well, if you'd like access, shush. We don't, we don't talk about that." I obviously have been in favor of moving Panarin for the Rangers. I've been very vocal in the fact that I think that they could do more with that cap space. He does have a no move, but I wonder what this offseason looks like for Artemi Panarin in particular, and what this does to the coaching search, because the Rangers should be a team that is contesting. They should be a team that is challenging. They should be a team.
I famously made some predictions at the start of the season that look very bad now about the Rangers. I didn't see why they would fall off, and I
actually had them cooling off for the first time in forever, because I'm always very high on the Rangers.
I thought for a few years that they shouldn't be as good as they were, but I was like, all right, well, fine. After a couple of seasons, maybe I'll learn my lesson and pick the other way. And apparently, no, I was previously right.
But what sort of coach do you bring in to take this? Now, names have been mentioned. The first one I'm going to mention, because of the Panarin thing, is Quenneville. Because there were a bunch of people who suggested that Joel Quenneville would be a really good hire in New York. If I'm Joel Quenneville, and my last stop, my most famously, I left my last stop because of what happened in Chicago and sexual assault allegations.
Yeah.
First of all, do the Rangers want to hire him with Panarin on the roster? Secondly, does Quenneville want to walk into a building with that hanging over him? Because the first question is going to be, how will you handle this?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to walk in the door if I was Joel Quenneville, But I think this is a really hard job, and this should not be a hard job to fill. I think this is a roster that's in more trouble than you think. And I don't think that the fact that Chris Drury gets to hire the replacement is absolutely ludicrous to me. How does a man that built this roster get to pick the next coach?
It's weird because, look, obviously, to roll back the clock a little bit, we've talked about a few times, they had that period of time where they thought that okay, well, it's all over for this core. It's all done. We're going to rebuild. We put we paid for a, full page spread in the newspaper. We're rebuilding. It's going to be rocky for a little while. They made a couple of draft picks, and then they decided that rebuild was done in record time because they were winning again and they made the playoffs again. They obviously didn't really particularly get anywhere, in terms of success that they expected from that. And then it kind of cooled off, and we're kind of back to where we are. And I don't know, they really didn't necessarily fix any of the problems that they had back then. Like, nothing has really gotten better since before that newspaper ad about rebuilding. They still have essentially the same structural problems in terms of young talent. They still have the same structural issues in terms of their center position and their defensive structure and everything. They're basically still playing the same run and gun hockey where they try to get their goalie to bail them out, and then they get a goal shorthanded or on the rush coming back the other way. Like that they've been doing essentially for like the last 10, 20 years. Like, this was the same game plan when they had Lundqvist in net. They just swapped out Shesterkin, and they've been doing the same thing the entire time. I guess it's just a matter of, are they happy for that to be their identity? I'm not sure that they are, but the way to fix that is to just tear it all down again and try again to draft those players, because the guys that they brought in, I don't think that even if you can say that like there was some success from like Lafreniere and Kako and all that kind of stuff, it certainly wasn't the success that they were hoping for with those pedigree of picks.
It's really interesting to me in terms of like Lafreniere's got his 7.4 kicking in next year, but there's no move on that. So I fully expect that a team in the offseason decides they are going to take a gamble on a Rangers player, but it's Lafreniere they want, not any of the others, because they're going to be too hard to get out the door.
Yeah.
But you've got, if you look at the big problem for the Rangers at the moment, you've got Panarin is on a no move, Zibanejad's on a no move, JT Miller's just come in on a no move. Vincent Trocheck's got a no move this season, and next season it becomes a 12-team no trade.
Miller, will say, like, in terms of the center issue or whatever, Miller has filled that role. How long that is before that turns into a situation too is another question. But
are you comfortable with a 32-year-old JT Miller as the first line center on your team if you're challenging for the playoffs?
Well, it's the thing. I think that they thought that they would be, as a playoff contender this year, and this team looks the age especially of this team looks very different if they're a playoff contender versus if they're trying to get back in the playoff picture.
To give you an idea for people who may not understand where the situation is, Panarin's 33, Zibanejad's 32, Miller's 32, Kreider's 33, Trocheck's 31, Carrick's 33. Then they've got a couple of like 22 and 21-year-olds out there. Then if you go on the defensive side, they've got a bit younger in terms of that. But realistically, it's Adam Fox, Condre Miller, who's an RFA, and then it sure is. And then it's Igor.
Everyone is just on the other side of their prime,
and this is the problem with the Rangers. They don't have a lot of players in the sweet spot. Realistically, Adam Fox is the player in the sweet spot.
Yeah,
right? He's it. Everyone else is sort of either slightly too young and on the improve, or probably
starting to decline,
the end of where they're going to be. And again, half of those players you can't move, and the players you can't move. Panarin 11 million, Zibanejad 8.5, Miller's on 8, Trocheck's on 5.625, Chris Kreider, who is movable, is on 6.5.
Yeah, and Shesterkin's 11.5 million kicks in next year as well.
Right, the Rangers are in a really poorly built position, and the guy who did this is picking
still making the shot, still making the calls.
Now, where I linked this in before to Tortorella, there have been suggestions in terms of who might be the coach. Tortorella's name's come back up again. They said that will be interesting because Drury doesn't like Tortorella. However, Dolan loves John Tortorella, and if Dolan decides he wants Tortorella, they get Tortorella. They keep naming Mike Sullivan as the favorite for the job, like he's going to walk out the door of the Penguins. And
Mike Sullivan has been the favorite for every coaching opening for the last 5 years.
Well, with Sullivan, they just keep on saying that Chris Drury was coached by Sullivan. So that means that obviously Sullivan wants to go and be the coach for Drury. Like, yeah. I'm sorry, Chris Drury played on a lot of teams.
Yeah, but Mike Sullivan, is friends with Tortorella or whatever, so therefore he's going to come in on every team that Tortorella, was on as well too, and basically since the Penguins missed the playoffs for the first time and ended that streak, Sullivan has ended up on like every coaching to watch list of the Penguins might move on from him and he might go here, might go here, might go here.
So the interesting thing for me is that there are a lot of college coaches being named again. Now, the problem is that they did this. They did this before with David Quinn. And they did this with David Quinn because they had a young roster.
Mm.
And one of the reasons they said they got rid of Quinn was the roster was starting to get a bit older and they needed someone with more experience, therefore, to run that roster. So going back to a college coach feels like not something that would be a good hire seen as a good hire within New York. Everyone keeps mentioning David Carl, who's obviously the hottest name within college hockey. I can't see David Carl, who's going to have his choice of first jobs, going a Rangers team that's very old and is a really hard team to get a rebuild going on. That's where I want to go. I just don't see that for Carl. I think he'll wait for something that looks a bit more promising. So I feel like it's either going to be an underwhelming college hire or a retread. And like the retreads, DJ Smith's name has come up a few times. I don't think that changes anything. Rick Tocchet keeps coming up with this idea of, well, he might not stay in Vancouver. Both situations are really messy. And can you see Rick Tocchet walking back into a locker room and saying hello to JT Miller? I don't know about you.
Yeah, I can't see that. I think honestly, the irony is probably Mike Sullivan. It would be actually quite a good option for them if he was available.
I don't think he's going out of it.
But I don't think they're interested in moving on from him.
This is where
if they haven't moved on from him over the last few years, when it's been at times something that I've been like, they really need to move on from Mike Sullivan. As much as I think he's a great coach, he's not right for them anymore. If they didn't move on from him then, I don't think it's happening now.
I kind of feel like the problem is the Rangers will want a flashy hire. But there's not really a good flashy hire out there because the roster's still the problem. And I just keep looking at all the coaching names that are coming up and going, I don't think you're like Bruce Boudreau's not it. Like that's not a thing. Rick Tocchet, if I'm Rick Tocchet, like he's in one situation that's a mess. Do you want to move to a different mess? Not really. If you look at all of the coaching names, the one who might be available is John Tortorella, and we've done this.
And someone's already tried the Mike Babcock thing. So
yeah, it's already been attempted, and Babcock didn't even get there. So I feel like we're in a situation where who are the Rangers going to hire? Like, I don't think I put it this way: the Boston Bruins are out there, right? Boston's an option. That's an interesting option for me. I don't know where they go, genuinely. I just don't know where they go. So obviously I think that what we're looking at is that I think we're looking at a situation where the New York Rangers are going to have to find a coach that suits this roster. But what this roster looks like, I don't think anyone's settled on. I would personally look at the roster, and if you're going to gut it, and this is something that Brendan's talked about before, he will be back in a moment. He's just having some technical issues, but he will be back in a moment. I think that what's really interesting for me is personally that if you look at what's going on with the New York Rangers currently, they probably need to gut the roster. But gutting this roster is impossible when you can't move Artemi Panarin, and especially after what's gone on with the Panarin situation. We don't obviously have the full story, but all of the news and gossip around the Panarin situation means that trying to get Artemi Panarin moved is probably nigh on impossible in this offseason. Again, and remember, he's also got the no-move clause, so he can control all of that. Mika Zibanejad, again, there's a feeling by some people that he's declining a bit. I think that Mika Zibanejad would be still a good option for a lot of teams out there. I think you could possibly move him. But again, no move means he gets to decide where he ends up. JT Miller's just come in, so you're not moving JT Miller out the door. Chris Kreider's an interesting case. Chris Kreider has largely been scoring goals for the Rangers. This season, he finally took a bit of a step back from where he has been scoring previously. But I still think that at 6.5, someone's going to look at that as a value move. Trocheck, again, at 5.625, I don't think Vincent Trocheck's your problem. He's been largely good on sort of the depth. I think Lafreniere is a player that probably gets moved. And you've got to remember as well, they've got a number of RFAs they've got to work out. Kaliev, for example, is there. You go down the list. You've got the Condre Miller. What do you think, if you're a Rangers fan or you're a Rangers head office, what do you think of Condre Miller? Do you think he's on 3.8 million at the moment? Do you think that Condre Miller is a viable option for you? And what is the number that Miller would come back under? And that's the other thing. I think that Miller has got value, but I think Miller also knows that the depth in terms of what they've got is not really there. So the depth that they've got in that defense means that Condre Miller knows that he could charge whatever he wants, really, for this second thing. Brendan's now come back with us, obviously. But I'm really interested.
Sorry about that. I realized what I did was
I'm really interested. I was saying then when you pop back in that I think Condre Miller is an interesting case as an RFA, because I think he can quote whatever price he wants at the Rangers at the moment, because he knows they've only got Adam Fox, really. So he can quote whatever.
There's no one else there backing him up. Yeah.
And he's
sorry about that. I realized what I did was I put my foot on the power button of the computer and turned it off.
Human error, folks. Human error.
That's a great thing to do right in the middle of a podcast. Totally,
it's fantastic.
Totally
that's
fun.
Okay. You know me. I can talk underwater, so I just kept going. But, yeah, all of those players they've got, it's very hard to see how you move them on. It's very hard to see how you can move any of these players on and get anything close to value back. The only one you can probably move
if they are intending to commit to rebuilding this team, which I don't think they are, if Drury is still the GM, it's going to be awkward. Like they're going to be in the same position that a bunch of other teams of their generation, like the Penguins and the Capitals and all of those kind of teams. They're going to have a handful of years of not real great before they start to get on the upswing again.
Yeah, so I still don't know who wants this job. I still don't know who's going to get this job. Good luck, whoever does get this job. Now, moving on, we've got some sad bits of information. Now, first of all, we'll start with Ray Shero. So Ray Shero obviously passed away at the age of 62. Had worked in front offices, obviously, with the Sens, the Preds, the Penguins, the Devils, and the Wild. He was also part of that Stanley Cup in 2009 in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, a bit of a shame. I think that he'd been unwell for a while, so I don't think it was a big surprise, but a big kind of 62. These days, when you were a kid, 62 felt like it was super old, but now like 62 is real young, and it's such a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame. And again, if he'd been a key part of a lot of those front offices, was part of that whole idea of trying to turn the Devils around, for example, in this most recent phase of the Devils, was a large part of trying to turn all of that around. So
yeah, there was some convenient timing just after it happened. The Penguins were playing the Devils, and they together, had a little ceremony and had little, stickers on their helmets and stuff like that. So it was nice to see him honored in that way.
Chaz Lucius, who's the Winnipeg Jets 18th overall pick in 2021, announced retirement from hockey after being diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Don't know much about that, but the idea of also it being Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is quite interesting for a Jets player. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's a genetic disorder that affects the body's connective tissues, primarily skin, joints, and blood vessels. So it can lead to hypermobility and a lot of other issues. So not something that you want to be a professional athlete.
Yeah, not good for skating. And then for me, the big one, obviously, is Logan Couture announced his retirement from professional hockey due to injury. Now, Logan Couture announced this. Now, when I say announced this, Logan Couture followed up the announcement of his retirement, which Frank Saravelli felt that it was his duty to report before the Sharks got to actually hold the press conference and tell everybody that Logan Couture was retiring, and they would have a ceremony tomorrow where they would confirm that Logan Couture was retiring. I know there are some people who are like, who cares? It's his retirement. Let him announce it. It just, Saravelli is quite tone deaf at times, and this just felt like another example of Frank being Frank. But look, I'm not shocked.
No.
I'm not surprised. This was coming. Logan's not been well for a while. There were threats that he might see the lineup. It's sad. It's really sad. Like, I think that for me, one of the saddest parts about this is that I don't think that a lot of people now will give Logan Couture his due for what he was at his peak. Yeah. Because a lot of people just go, well, they never won a cup. He was the captain, but he was injured all the time. He wasn't. Logan Couture, the injury, and I've said this to you before, and we've talked about this, and we went back and looked at that cup final. The Logan Couture injury, for me, was the largest factor in the Sharks losing to the Penguins. Because Couture, in the series before that Stanley Cup final, was absolutely unplayable. For that whole playoff run, Couture was a man possessed, and he was the best player on the Sharks by a country mile. And he gets injured in the Western Conference Finals, and basically plays almost no role in the Stanley Cup final. And that loss meant that the Sharks were just down one of their prime weapons.
Yeah, it went from being like, what should have been a good series to like, okay, well, they've lost their edge. Like,
yeah, Logan Couture is the last remnant of that Sharks team, really. I know Marko Vlasic's still on the roster, but like, that's nominal.
Yeah, but I mean, it's been a long time since anyone's considered him favorably.
Yeah, Logan's. By the way, the Vlasic contract's got 1 year left, folks. We're almost there.
You got 1 more year to make trade pickles.
I've got 1 more off season to move him. But yeah, Logan Couture is 36 too, which is still fairly young to retire. $8 million.
Chris, are we going to do an emergency podcast if Vlasic ever gets moved? We did that emergency podcast when Carlson got traded the first time.
Oh, if Vlasic ever gets moved, forget an emergency podcast. There's a parade.
It'll be to somehow it'll be to the Coyotes, even though the Coyotes are no longer a team.
What I will do is I will book out like an ice rink in Sydney and then an ice rink in Melbourne, and we will do 2 different live shows in ice rinks, just to celebrate the Marko Vlasic farewell tour. But look, Logan Couture, he'll never quite get his due because of the injuries and because of the way it all ended. But when he was on, like, there's a reason why they felt comfortable enough moving on from Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau, and that was they thought that Logan could hold that down. And obviously injuries curtailed it, and he was never quite the same. And his last couple of seasons, he did say that for him, his favorite moment outside of that Stanley Cup run was the infamous comeback in Vegas. Which he was the catalyst for, because he was the player they hit to give away the major, and it was the Logan going down is what cost them that game and blew Vegas up in that season. But yeah, look, I think a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, say hello to your new captain of the San Jose Sharks, Tyler Toffoli, because I think that's going to happen. And I'm happy with that. Also, the Sharks get $8 million in IR money for the next couple of seasons, which is not nothing.
It could be useful for sure.
It will be very useful for them. They've got this off season. They lose the Martin Jones buyout comes off the books. They're still paying bonus cushions. The Brent Burns contract finally comes off the books.
No.
They've still got Carlston and Hurdle, but they've now got one retention spot left. So they can possibly make use of that as well. But look, a great player for the Sharks, captain. I don't know if they'll retire. I don't think they'll retire his jersey, but he'll make the Hall of Fame definitely. I don't think they'll retire the number. I don't think he'll get a Marlowe and Thornton treatment. I think there's a couple of other players in line for that first. Burns when he comes back, for example. But look, obviously a sad day for Sharks fans, and a player with, again, I don't want to say unfulfilled potential will be his sort of, but it's like kind of like he didn't quite get where he probably should have because of the injury.
Yeah, things didn't just quite bounce the right way.
No, I mean, look, he's leaving a Sharks team that, even though they came absolutely last, is in a really, really positive spot right now. And
yeah, I mean, honestly, for a team, talking about like having some of those kind of, assets that rebuilding teams want to have in terms of being able to take on, cap while already having, an exciting team to watch on the roster, being able to kind of do both of those things at the same time, rather than just being a dump for contracts like Arizona was at that point, in their cycle. They actually have like, a fun team to watch at the same time that they have a bunch of cap and a bunch of, retention spots and things that they can be players in the rebuilding market.
Celebrini, Smith, Bordelot, Eklund is still on an entry-level contract, which people forget.
Yeah. Whoever they get this year as well,
Yeah, or whoever it happens to be, whichever they pick. I don't think the Sharks would be that upset with second if the team above them needs a center, because I think they're going to go the defense. I think they'll go the defenseman. I can't remember what it is, but it's the center and the defenseman.
Do we know when the lottery pick is going to be yet?
Not sure. I'll have to look that up.
I haven't seen it announced, but they usually do at some point during the first round, right?
But the Sharks have got, obviously, apart from the players that are still obviously down with the Barracuda, who are now currently playing with the Barracuda as well, like players like Philip Bydstad, Colin Graff, Quentin Musty, who's been really good playing for the Barracuda. So you've got some very good Colin White's down there, again, experienced Colin White, 28. I was wondering where Colin White had bounced up. The answer is the Sharks. They've got enough good young players. Sam Dickinson on the Barracuda has had a great season, and he's going to be a great defenseman for them. The Barracuda are doing really well. They have also announced that Georgiev said at the end of the last game that he's already been told that they're not retaining him. He's a UFA. The plan was never to retain Georgiev, because that net next year, everyone already knows that's Askarov's net. And so he'll take that net and Georgiev will go off. That trade did what it needed to do.
It looks like last year the draft lottery draw was May 7, so we might have a similar thing in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see. Also, just look, while I'm looking here, before we move on, we're about to move on, but on Puckpedia at the moment, they've pointed out that there are 11 teams currently who will be in bonus cap overage for next season. So those teams, and it could be 12. If Ryan Leonard happened to win the Conn Smythe for Washington, it's 12. So at the moment, St. Louis have 2.15 million over, which for St. Louis is wild.
Yeah.
Most of the teams have got not much. Like Carolina's got 33,000, for example. Edmonton have 150,000. For example, Perry gets 50K if the team wins the second round, and 50K if the team wins the third round. So they might save some money there in Edmonton. But outside of that, it's between 2 million and 33,000. But the overages are interesting. Marco Rossi and Brock Faber are the reason why Minnesota are going to be 1.1 million over. And to be blunt, you'd pay that. If I'm Minnesota, I am definitely paying that one. All right, let's get into the playoffs, shall we? Because we're there. Sure. So I'm going to start with my bracket.
Yeah.
So, because we're going to run through all the playoff series.
Yeah, let's go through each of the series and we'll talk about our picks and stuff.
Yeah, as we go through. So let's start with the West. We always start with the East. So let's start with the West. Winnipeg versus St. Louis. Now, obviously, the first game, Winnipeg won 5-3. Scored 3 in the third. Interestingly, some very shaky goaltending to start with in Winnipeg.
Yeah, not what they were hoping for out of Connor Hellebuyck. Hasn't quite been his sterling self in the start of the series, but obviously it's still early.
We did say that Winnipeg will go as far as Hellebuyck takes them.
Yeah, definitely. Look, notably, Winnipeg have a few injuries. There's a lot of teams that have some injuries that we'll kind of get into and stuff. Eel, as you mentioned before, I think is still out and things like that. But it's I don't know. I think this is going to be an interesting series because if Winnipeg's goaltending is shaky, that's definitely going to be a deciding factor on whether or not they can win this series for sure. Like this one very easily could have gone to St. Louis if there'd been a different third period. They were leading going into the third. So curious to see how it pans out. I did pick Winnipeg to win this series in 6. What about you?
I've got Winnipeg in. I think I have Winnipeg in 5. No, this is 6. Yeah, I've got 5. Yeah, I've got 5. I've only given 1 to St. Louis. I think Winnipeg will handle them.
I think they're the better team of the two. But
St. Louis are playing. Look, St. Louis are playing with house money.
Yes, yeah.
But look, I was surprised that they were able to hang for as long as they were in game 1. And as I said, that's a Connor Hellebuyck thing. And I think this will be a really interesting series and an interesting playoffs for the narrative around Connor Hellebuyck. Because that narrative around Connor Hellebuyck has always been quite interesting but he sort of goes missing in the bigger moments. And I think that this is what Winnipeg's paying him for. This is it. So it's up to what he does in this playoff run. And if he's shaky, that's a problem for them.
Yeah, they're probably done if that's the case.
Let's get to Dallas versus Colorado. So Colorado did exactly what I thought they would do here. Because as we know, I am a Dallas doubter. I have been a Dallas doubter the whole time. And I am largely a Dallas doubter because I don't believe in DeBoer hockey past a couple of seasons. And I think we're at that point. So Landeskog's back, but not starting the series, obviously. Robertson was questionable after his knee injury in the last regular game. However, Colorado they were never headed in this one.
No.
And DeBoer's already making excuses, which if I'm a Dallas fan, I'm terrified for. He made a statement after the game that said this was a great squad, and then they got Mackenzie Blackwood. And I'm sorry, but if you think Mackenzie Blackwood is the reason, what are you doing with this team that is super talented and should be doing better?
So I will say that I made my pick for this series before the last game of the season, which is unfortunately where Jason Robertson injured his knee. He may not play this series, which is a huge kind of. I think if I knew that going in, I probably would have picked the other way around. I did pick Dallas because I kind of wanted to stay true to some of my predictions from the start of the season about them, and I think at times Colorado have looked very average this season, but a lot of that was injury based. So I could definitely see it going either way. If Robertson doesn't come back for the series, I think those two teams are interchangeable in the West. Like I would take Colorado instead of Dallas in the matchups that are to follow. But yeah, it is what it is. I picked Dallas in 6, but I could very much see it going the other way if Robertson doesn't come back.
You know me, I'm an Avs believer. I've got Colorado in 6.
I'd be happy to see it either way.
I just think that Nathan MacKinnon at this time of season, at this time of year, is very special. And again, it's two things. It's Nathan MacKinnon is very special at this time of year, and I've lived DeBoer playoff hockey. I've lived the good seasons of DeBoer playoff hockey, and then what happens once those go away. And I just feel like we are in a situation where DeBoer could go in with one of the favorites for the Stanley Cup and come out fired. And I could very much see that being something that could happen. I did pick DeBoer would be fired during the season. So people might think this is my anti-DeBoer vendetta, and kind of, but not really. I just feel like Colorado are a stronger team, and I said Nathan MacKinnon is special. And McKinnon's not going to win. He's not going to win the heart because Draisaitl exists, but he made a very strong case for it this year. Very strong case for it. All right, let's go on to the other side of the bracket. Vegas and Minnesota. Now, Vegas took game 1 4-2 at home. My original pick, I think, when we did our preseason, I think I picked Vegas to win it all. I have changed that, by the way, but I'm not surprised that Vegas won that. What I was surprised, Minnesota hung in there quite well. It's this one's got potential to be a bit spicy.
Yeah, I think it could definitely, like, there's some factors in this. Obviously, Kaprizov is always an X factor for Minnesota. There's a lot that could happen there. They've got a pretty solid team relatively. I do think that Vegas is the stronger team overall. But and given it, it seems like they're both healthy at the moment.
Yep.
I think that Vegas probably still should win this, but it could be a lot closer than I expected. I picked Vegas in 5, but given how close the first one was, it could be a lot closer.
I've got Vegas in 5 too, but I think it could be a spicy 5.
Yeah.
I think it might.
It could be one of those ones where every game is like a 1-goal game, but
I just think that Vegas. I think Minnesota play a lot of Kaprizov and Boldy and a lot of those players that are big game changing players and exciting. And Vegas's ability is they can stifle that. And I just feel like they'll suffocate it. Vegas don't outpace you. Vegas suffocate you. Like they are an anaconda. Like they don't strike fast and strike hard. They just suffocate the life out of you and then just pick you off. And that's kind of what they did today. Like Matt Boldy was really good, but they just squeezed the life out of Minnesota. And I feel like that's probably what we're going to see. LA versus Edmonton. Now, it won't shock people to know that I am once again not an Oilers believer. Having said that, this Kings team is getting destroyed because they're not particularly good. They haven't particularly improved from where they were last season. Yes, they finished ahead of the Oilers, but the Oilers were terrible to start the season.
Yes.
And
I've
learned from the first time the Kings played the Oilers in the playoffs in this recent run, they should have beaten them. Last year, no, they fell apart. This year, I am not prepared to say it's anything other than Edmonton. I don't think Edmonton's going too far, but I think that there's an obstacle they're going to run into in the next round that's a bit bigger and tougher than they are. But I just don't think the Kings have the firepower or the defensive resiliency to stop the Oilers.
So this is really funny because usually we're the other way around. And traditionally, I've been kind of an Oilers believer in terms of thinking that, McDavid and Draisaitl will kind of, pull them through being, a pretty flawed team. This time, I think I just picked the funniest outcome, and I picked Kings in 7 because I don't think either team can get past the next round. I don't think that either team gets out of the second round. It didn't matter to me too much, and I felt like it would just be hilarious if it was again another 7-game series that the Kings just kind of, despite being probably not the better team on paper, just kind of choke them out.
I've got Edmonton in 5. My rationale behind this is not because I think that they're stunning. It's because I think this is almost the funnier outcome. And my reasoning for this is that the hype train will take off because I think they will win in something like 5. Yeah. And the hype train will be the Oilers just brushed the Kings off like nothing. But nobody on the Kings is really going to test the Oilers' defense and goaltending, and their goaltending is still atrocious. Absolutely horrific. And so I don't think the Oilers are going to have their goaltending tested. I don't think that the defense is going to be able to stifle the McDavid-Draisaitl pairing unless they're more injured than we think they are. They're not great, but I think they're healthy enough. But if they're not that injured, then maybe. But I just think that I think that the Kings had the element of surprise once and should have got there and didn't. And since then, they've progressed. The gap has progressively grown. And I just feel like the Oilers will be able to do enough to get past the Kings to give them false hope.
Mm.
And it will be false hope. Because I think that the second that the Oilers bump into a real hockey club, someone's going to pound them. And it's coming. Let's quickly just go through the rest of the West before we go to the East. So my second round, I have Winnipeg versus Colorado.
And I've got Winnipeg versus Dallas, but I mean, I'm happy. Like, I think that the outcome is basically, interchangeable between Dallas and Colorado there.
Yeah, I've got Colorado winning that one, and then obviously
I got Dallas winning that one,
and I've got the Kings versus the Oilers, and the Knights versus the Oilers, and no surprise, I've got the Golden Knights winning.
I got the Knights coming out of that one as well,
which means I've got a conference final of the Colorado Avalanche versus Vegas, and I switched my preseason pick and I went Colorado.
Interesting. Look, I picked Dallas. Obviously, this is all before the Robertson stuff. I feel like that one was my hardest pick in the whole kind of bracket, because I think that by and large the West is just so much stronger than the East in terms of the teams that are kind of in the playoffs this year, and it was really just you're kind of picking who's going to win, like the playoffs, right? Like that's basically your Stanley Cup pick of who comes out of those. I wouldn't be surprised, interchangeably between Colorado and Dallas there and Vegas. I wouldn't be surprised, if any of those teams were the team that came out of it. In that moment, in that time, I picked Dallas, but I don't know. I'm not confident about that one now.
For me, my Colorado focus is 100% just Nathan McKinnon. Like, if ever there was one where I'm like, one player has the ability, and
I feel like he's had that run though. Like, he's already done that, basically carrying the team all the way.
I kind of said so. There's two things with that I think are a bit different with it. So first of all, the reason I'm okay with the Nathan McKinnon run, but I'm not okay with something like, for example, the McDavid run being able to do it, is that, first of all, he's done it. Yeah. Secondly, I think what's around McKinnon in Colorado is better than what's around McDavid and Draisaitl in Edmonton.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's the difference, is that I think that Nathan McKinnon can carry Colorado because the depth is there. Whereas in Edmonton, you get McDavid, you get Draisaitl, and then there is a gap. They're talking about the secret weapon they've got for the playoffs is Evander Kane might play. And
I will say, I still don't really like Colorado's bottom six, but I feel a lot better about their depth with Brock Nelson in their second line center position now. Like, being able to actually roll like two decent lines is a big improvement.
I also think that the secret weapon that Colorado have now got is having Netchus on the line with McKinnon. That's insane. Those two are so good together. Who knew? Give Nathan McKinnon someone to give him the puck. And who knew he'd be amazing? Like that pairing would be amazing.
I mean, look, obviously he had that previously with Rantanen. Like, I think it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, but I think what they've done is give him someone who can do it now for longer. So I think it's an extension on that. Let's go to the East, shall we? And let's start off by making some people very happy and other people very upset. Toronto versus Ottawa. Toronto take game 1, 6-2 at home. This series is largely, I forgot before this series started that Ullmark against Toronto in the playoffs is terrible. and I forgot that it was like the Swayman stuff with Boston, and like he was absolutely abysmal in this one. Like, horrific. Toronto jumped out. Ottawa pegged them back a little bit, but like every time Ottawa scored, they then leaked a goal in 30 seconds. So Toronto fans, people who want to say they've done the right thing by bringing in Berube hockey, I think Toronto's winning this series. I just don't think I think Ottawa making this series is their reward. I do have it going 6 because it's the Leafs, and at some point they will be 3 up at one point, and then they'll lose 2 to make it get tight, and then they'll win the 4th one.
Yeah, I mean, look, this kind of reminds me of the last time Ottawa were in the playoffs, and they kind of managed to make it through to a couple of rounds or whatever. Like, it's possible that they could pull some shit out and just kind of make it further than they should. But honestly, Ottawa and not, spoilers for later, Montreal just honestly have no business being in the playoffs. They're not worthy of playoff
God, no.
teams. In it's just that the East is just so bad this year that someone had to make it, and they're
The
the teams that
Atlantic,
made it.
the Atlantic in particular, actually everything. The Metro was horrible too.
Yeah.
But the Atlantic in particular, the fact you've got the wild card teams making it from the Atlantic, first of all, that shows you that the Metro was
that's how bad the Metro was.
But like Ottawa and Montreal in most regular seasons would be nowhere near this.
Yeah, and they're not any better than they were previously. They're not actually any better. It's just that everyone in front of them fell down.
No. So I've got this series going Toronto 4-2.
I've got Toronto in 5.
Yeah. The second in this series is, I think, one we both predicted. We thought Tampa would go quite well. I think from memory, we both said that we thought Tampa would be good.
Yes, I quite like Tampa at the start of the season, especially with the Gensel pickup.
I've got Tampa winning this one 4-1.
Interesting. I've got 4-2 for Tampa. Like, I think that the Florida thing is always a bit spicy. I think it's going to be a fun kind of back and forth a little bit. Obviously, they haven't played yet, but I don't think Florida are the same team that they were when they won.
They've not got the goaltending they had.
Yeah, I don't like their their depth. I don't like their kind of. They're not getting that same run from Bobrovsky again, it's probably not going to be a repeat for them. I just don't really think they've got the legs to make it through any further.
Yeah, I 4-1. I just think that I said before the season I thought that Tampa had gotten better in terms of they were just more robust than they were, and that would go quite well for them.
It's funny because I still don't think that they're the best that they've been in the last few years. Like there were plenty of years I think where they're better than they were now, but the East was just so much stronger. Like this was points in time when the East was the better conference, and they just didn't make it through to the final. But now they're probably not quite there, but the East is just so much worse.
I think the East has 3 good teams.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is for one of those 3 good teams, we don't know how good they are because they were largely beating up on really crappy opposition.
Yes, yeah.
And they've got a habit of doing that in the regular season and not being good in playoffs.
Yeah.
Caps Habs. This is my sweep.
I tried. I couldn't pick a sweep. I don't know. It's so difficult. I could absolutely see it happening, but I did pick Caps in 5.
Yeah, I went Caps 4-0. I
think the only reason is that I am skeptical of the Caps in the playoffs for for reasons that you mentioned.
Look, my views on the Habs. I hate that construction.
I don't like either of these teams making it deep, but
no. And I think that the other one is that if we knew now if we knew what we know now before we made these predictions, I think the next one might have been the sweep. Yeah. Because Carolina versus the Devils.
Yeah.
Carolina won quite easy, and Jack Hughes is out.
Yeah, Jack Hughes is out, for the season, shoulder surgery. Luke Hughes and Cody Glass were injured in game 1.
Yeah.
They didn't have any chance coming into this series with Jack Hughes out. They have less chance now. It probably will be a sweep. I did pick it at the time as Carolina in 5.
Yeah, I've gone Carolina in 5 too. So let's go through our other side of this. So that means we have Toronto versus I have Toronto versus Tampa. You have Toronto versus Tampa.
Yep.
I have Tampa.
Yeah, I've got Tampa as well. Yeah.
I think Leafs fans, you're getting 1 series.
Look, we didn't, we talked about it previously about how we didn't really believe in Toronto or that didn't think that they'd gotten any better. It's just that the East got worse.
Look, could Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner decide to just go, and William Nylander just decide to go, screw you? Yeah, they could.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But we need to see it.
I'd be happy to see it. But
I'd be happy to see Austin Matthews do something like that. And the other interesting thing for me is, and this is something that's going as Toronto gets deeper, the narrative around the Marner off season will get louder because it'll be he's earning money in the off season.
Yeah.
Mitch Marner is printing money on this contract, and that distraction will kick in. So that'll be really interesting for me to see what happens with that. The other side of it is the Caps versus the Hurricanes. I've got Carolina.
I went back and forward a little bit on this one. I don't really believe in Carolina that much. Obviously, I believe in them enough to beat New Jersey in the previous round, but I really feel like they've kind of been real up and down this season. They very well could come out of this series, but I think that the Caps have had this weird team of destiny thing going on this year, where neither of these teams have been like super high scoring, exciting kind of teams where you go, oh, look at this, they're going to put 8 on you all of a sudden or whatever. But Washington just kind of feel like the little bit more of a wagon this year. So I actually went Washington in this one.
Okay, interesting. I've gone Carolina. So that means that my conference final is Tampa versus Carolina.
Yeah, and I've got Tampa and Washington.
Tampa. I've got Carolina.
Interesting. I picked Tampa out of that.
So that means my Stanley Cup final is Colorado versus Carolina.
Yeah. And I've got Dallas, or, interchangeably, probably if I'd gone back now, I would have picked Colorado instead, and Tampa.
And I have the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup.
Interesting, yeah, and I had Dallas. I think it's going to be someone from the West either way.
I think whoever wins, if it goes Vegas, Colorado, like I expected, whoever wins the conference final is the overwhelming favorite for the Stanley Cup.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I don't think 12 months ago you would have called that the East was going to be weak.
No, it didn't seem like it was going to be this bad. Like, there were a handful of teams that just totally fell off the map.
Yeah, it's really interesting the speed at which it all collapsed. And
I mean, I don't think that we expected that Washington would be this solid either.
No, I thought that they'd get I thought that Ovi get his record, but yeah. I said that I thought that Ovi will get the record because the only thing the Caps have to play for is the record. So
yeah, I think that would be their playoffs. Basically, would be.
I think I had them making the playoffs. You didn't. I think because I said that I was comfortable enough that Ovi would score enough they'd make the playoffs. I did not have them where they are. I did not have them winning the Metro.
I don't think anyone did. I can't imagine anyone did.
No, I had Carolina winning the Metro. And because I had the Rangers just scraping in, which even then, who knew that was folly? But I think this is, if ever there was a year that Toronto is going to do it, this is kind of it. Because I think the East is weak enough that Toronto could get themselves into a spot. And if they get themselves there, who the hell knows? Yeah. Like, this is for me, if you are a Leafs fan and you are looking for some level of hope, the hope for you as a Leafs fan is that this is the weakest the East has been for a while and probably will be.
Absolutely. If ever, in the last 10 years, the Leafs were going to make the Cup final, is probably this year.
Like, if they don't progress past that second round, I would consider it a failure, genuinely. And they'll go, oh, they win a round there. That's no. This team needs to make it to the conference final.
Yeah, because it's probably not going to be this bad next year. No. Teams will fix things. There'll be other teams that come up.
And genuinely, the other thing, and I'm not stirring your Leafs fans, but Mitch Marner, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. That is ticking.
I can't imagine that the Leafs are going to be better next year than they are now.
No, I think the Leafs get worse, not better. And like Stollarz has been good in net, and I don't know if that continues. At least have a habit of finding a goalie who's decent for a season. I think that Montreal will be better next year. So I think that's something to consider. I think Ottawa could be a lot better next year. Like, I think this is their learn what this looks like year for them. Florida, I don't expect to get better, but I expect that there are, again, I think there are teams that missed out on the playoffs this year in the East.
Yeah, that
you would expect will not miss out this year. Like, I as much as I think the Rangers are in big trouble, they're also like 3 decent moves away from.
Yeah, there were a handful of teams that basically just had a bad stretch and otherwise would have been in contention. There are a few teams that if they just had two better weeks somewhere during the season, they would have been in the wildcard picture.
Exactly. So that's going to do us for this week. So we will be back to probably recap the end of round one. So thank you everyone for watching, listening, whatever you happen to do. We will again. We're working on being more regular again, folks. It's coming back. So look forward to watching the playoffs. Whoever you happen to support, and if you like me and follow the Sharks, or like Brendan and follow the Penguins, enjoy some time to watch hockey where you don't really care.
It's kind of nice, honestly, sometimes to have no stakes.
I mean, I've been used to this for the last couple of seasons, and it's I don't have stakes.
It's been a few years now, honestly, with the Penguins being out of the playoffs too. It is what it is.
You've had a horrible stretch there. You've had a terrible run. It's been
it's been the worst. Yeah,
it's been so hard. Look, again, I feel like we won the cup because we got Macklin Celebrini. Anyway, that'll do us for this week. Thank you everyone for watching and listening, and we will catch you all later.
Yeah.